I would like to now introduce to you Ms. Brid Brennan. She's the Program Coordinator for Economic Justice, Corporate Power and Alternatives at the Transnational Institute of Policy Studies in the Netherlands. And she will be presenting the Institute's new report, The State of Corporate Power, and will touch on some key developments in shifts of wealth and power of transnational corporations and their CEOs in comparison to the further losses and impoverishment of the 99%. Please welcome Ms. Brid Brennan.
Thank you and good morning. It's indeed a privilege and a pleasure to be here at the Public Eye Awards and to have a few minutes to share with you some of the analysis and insights from the work of the Transnational Institute. And maybe also at least touch on some of the background to the mysteries and the mantras that Thomas has just dealt with. It's interesting yesterday in the Financial Times that there was this headline that the elite at Davos this year were feeling a little threatened compared to the kinds of concerns they had over the last 4 years since 2008. Every year the World Economic Forum had the big agenda of the crisis, the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the euro crisis, etc. But it seems this year there's some sense that these type of crises are underhand, and according to Gideon Rachman, the concern for 2014 is actually the rise of populism. I will come back to that later. But this morning, since it's a rather short time frame, there are 5 points that I would just like to raise with you for your consideration. The first is that, well, the handling of the crisis. I mean, maybe some of us perhaps thought in 2008, this is one of the tipping points in terms of taking a new direction in the economy, at least in terms of taking some substantive regulation of banks and financial corporations and how they operate, as well as also the issues of tax, etc., which are a big portion, tax evasion, a big portion of the big profits of the corporations that are often here under the Public Eye Awards. In actual fact, over the last 5 years, but even in 2013, corporations have continued to gain enormously from the crisis. And it is none less than Paul Krugman who said, actually, well, you know, the measures that have addressed the crisis are not really about fixing the crisis. They are really measures that have continued to uphold the status quo and the operations of transnational corporations as we have known them. We have seen that in 2013, for example, the richest section of the population have continued to grow ultra-rich. In actual fact, 40% of the global businesses are mainly controlled by the banks and the financial corporations. We have also seen that in terms of the growth of profits that have marked the first 9 months of 2013, I think we have it here in the slide. Yeah, the world's ultra-rich have got 11% wealthier the first 9 months of 2013, while I think those of us who live in Europe even, but also around the world, the actual income of people has fallen through loss of livelihood and through unemployment. So the winners and losers can be, in a way, easily identified. The winners continue to be the corporations and the bigger corporations. The type of the gains that have been made by the corporations, maybe we can get a sense of the proportions if we consider that the gains made by the top 100 richest people are equivalent to 1,000 years of Rwanda's public government expenditure, or equivalent to 130 years of the costs of climate change adaptation. So this is really a major feature of what's wrong with the current economic system. But it's not only the question of the ultra-rich and how their wealth continues to increase. It's also a question of concentration. The concentration of the wealth of the world in the hands of a very few large corporations. In a study of 41,000 companies and corporations, the vast majority of the 37 of the world's largest economies are corporations. So 37 corporations are larger than many of the countries of the world. The second point I would like to raise is the question of, and this is very much central to the agenda of the Public Eye Awards, is the question of accountability and the question of impunity of transnational corporations. It's Jeremy Sachs who said that there's a culture of impunity. I think Thomas also touched on this in the sense that we've grown used to the fact that, well, this is how corporations operate anyway. But in actual fact, this culture of impunity, yes, exists at one level in the public consciousness and the public opinion, but also there is an architecture of impunity which has been created by in a sense, the collaboration that exists between corporations and governments. Corporations have been able, and I think we can go back as far as 40 years ago with the imposition of the coup in Chile, corporations have been able to create the governments or create the conditions of collaboration with government whereby the system of deregulation, privatization, etc., creates the environment in which impunity is absolutely a part, and where corporations have refused over the decades to accept any binding responsibilities for their operations. This architecture of impunity, well, maybe it's like the cube that Thomas referred to. It's quite an arsenal, actually. It's the arsenal of free trade agreements. It's international investment agreements. But it's also the institutions and instruments that are able to force this into legislation, into changing national constitutions, into changing laws. So we have the expression of this in, well, even if we look at the very latest session of the World Trade Organization in Bali, where the big agenda was really the corporate agenda of trade facilitation, which was run through. And we have no less than Acevedo, the new Director General of the World Trade Organization, saying in a very enthusiastically, actually, and very convincingly on Brazilian television that corporations love the WTO. They love the World Trade Organization. They need it, and the world couldn't run the way it's running without it. Besides these institutions, there is the law of the market. Thomas has been indicating in a way maybe the more philosophical considerations about the market, but in actual fact, the market also it remains very much part of the structure in which corporations can work and operate with impunity. One of the instruments, in a way, we tend to think that the stock market is the main instrument of the market, but actually there are other instruments, and one of them is the ICSID, the Center for the Settlement of International Disputes. This is one of the more notorious instruments where corporations can sue governments, but governments cannot sue corporations. And to give an example from 2013 also, the ICSID awarded, it's also called an award, awarded Petroleum Occidental the sum of $203 billion US. This is a fine which the Ecuadorian government is compelled to pay to Occidental Petroleum Company, a US company. This is equivalent to 59% of the Ecuador's annual budget, and it's equivalent to 135% of their annual healthcare budget. This asymmetry that exists in the whole juridical system, well, examples and case studies can be multiplied. However, I think, what I would like also to raise is the fact that while we have binding obligations on governments, and we have instruments to implement them, we don't have similar instruments for transnational corporations. There isn't any binding treaty on transnational corporations. And this, in a sense, coupled with the fact that what we do have is a voluntary system of corporate social responsibility, creates a situation that even though companies are maybe in national courts charged with fraud or with tax evasion or with corruption, and certain heads of CEOs will resign or will be toppled. In actual fact, the situation corporate social responsibility remains a very weak instrument. But I would also like to flag up, and I think this is really important for those of you journalists who are following the World Economic Forum, it's not just the inroads in the way in which our economy is running, but it's also the way in which our democracies are functioning. Especially one of the recent major reports of the World Economic Forum, the Global Redesign Initiative, called Everybody's Business, is really promoting a new formula for government. And this is multi-stakeholderism. That is that, well, governance is no longer the question or the responsibility or even the capability of governments. It's, this has to be the question, this has to be a new system where corporations mainly will have a major say in governments and how we are governed. Maybe my last point is, of course, historically, both inside the UN system, but also outside it, and also in initiatives from the ground, there have been major efforts to, of course, not only challenge the system, but to change it. And I would like to flag up the Extraterritorial Obligations Initiative and the Global Campaign to Dismantle Corporate Power. We are very much at a moment where there is a new convergence around this things. While it looks like, the World Economic Forum is on to business as usual, maybe with some new dimensions. But in actual fact, there is also a convergence growing among social movements and trade unions and others who are dealing with corporations on the ground. And one of the major aspects of this is it's not just any longer a question of critique, it's a question of creation of transformative alternatives. And we can say more about this maybe in the question and answer. Thank you. By the way, the State of Power report, there's some parts of it down on the table for any of you who